about yourself, the work that you do, and some passions that you have.
Great. My name is Jeannine Carpenter. I am the Director of Research and Policy for the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga. And the Women's Fund's goal is to change the laws and sort of the systemic processes that create the root causes for these problems. So we work a lot in Nashville with our state legislature trying to pass laws. And we also do a lot of advocacy education. So we'll talk with students at UTC or at Southern or at Covenant, and we'll say, this is how you use your voice. Love my job. So sometimes I get super excited about talking about it because very few people have the opportunity to live their passion of making change as a career. And I get to be that person.
I feel like even fewer people love their job this much. So, I mean, I love that. I'm very excited that the work that you're doing, you're passionate about it. I would hope the people doing your job are this passionate. So I think that's very great. What is the importance, do you believe, in students knowing advocacy work? What do you think can be the benefits? Why do you think it's so necessary for students to get into this work?
There's probably nothing that the Women's Fund does that is more important than educating students and other people to get involved in advocacy work, because advocacy is a long game. You don't make change in a minute, not when you're dealing with the legislature or a city council or a school board. These aren't things where you show up to a meeting, you make your case, and they're like, yes, you're so brilliant, we're gonna make a change. These are things where you spend months and years.
I completely agree. As a student who's just really gotten into full-on advocacy and looking at policymaking just last year, before working with Unified, I had no idea the impact that these policies had on my life. I mean, never mind on the local level, but when you just get bigger and bigger, I didn't realize how much it really affected me. And then I, made the realization I don't really have the option to not care or to just say that's someone else's job or I just need to wait on, other people to do it for me. I realized, through people like you doing the work that you do, that I have a part in this as well. So that is great that you acknowledge that and that we have to look at everyone to help with these issues. In a world and in a country where a lot of women's specifically choices and rights are dictated by policy and by the government, do you think that the passing or vetoing of certain laws affects women's health specifically?
Yes. I mean, not to give a really simple answer, but I think that most bills that are passed having to do with healthcare have a significantly higher impact on women. And when I say women, I am saying just a generalized woman. We can talk about the even greater impact on the LGBT community by these laws if you wanted to, but just in a general sense, these laws always have a greater impact on women for a variety of reasons. Number one, most significantly, most mental health and physical health studies use samples to come up with their evidence. They are almost always predominantly men. And the standards for healthcare in our country are based on what is healthy for men. Well, that's the same thing when you're talking about advocacy and laws. If you are only advocating on behalf of women's health, particularly things like access to contraception, access to family planning resources, they are taken to be less significant a societal concern because our baseline is men.
Wow. That research, I completely, like I said, this knowledge is great. Some of it is super surprising. Some of it, it's like you see a little link on Facebook about it and you're like, wow, that's disappointing. And just moving on with that in the mental health aspect, I noticed that on y'all's YouTube, you guys have created videos on empowerment and self-care and health and safety. And I think that's just super great. And that's a little bit of the premise of what we're actually doing with these videos. So what tips do you have for students, young adults, to kind of maintain that mental health throughout this unprecedented time?
The first thing that's important with mental health is knowing who you are and being willing to accept who that is, even if it's different. The second thing is accepting help. Everyone during this time needs to be able to say to someone else, this is how I feel. And sometimes that's really hard because people don't know who the person in their life is that they can have that conversation with, but everyone needs that conversation. I'm answering your question as it pertains to youth, but this is true of adults too.
Thank you for those tips. Those have definitely been really beneficial to me. When you mentioned that person that's like, I should be doing more, we have more free time. I was definitely that person at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, why am I not working out? Why am I not getting my whole life together right now? I was really struggling with that, especially seeing social media and people were like starting new businesses and stuff. I'm like, I'm barely getting out of bed. Like, how are y'all doing this? So just hearing your tips and advice has really been helpful to me because I definitely relate to it and kind of that confusion going on right now. So that's definitely necessary, and thank you for that.
And can I add one more?
Of course.
And the other thing I would add is be aware of the resources that are available. And if you don't know what they are, we post them across our social media all the time. And we have mental health hotlines, we have suicide hotlines, we have self-care hotlines, we have domestic and interpersonal violence hotlines. Know that there is help, even when you're not sure who's already in your life that you can call.
I think that's great. Do you, speaking of advocacy and lobbying, can you go a little bit into depth about what lobbying is and the necessity for it in our policymaking?
Right. So there's a lot of different ways to talk about lobbying. And the way that most people hear about it is most of the time when folks talk about lobbyists, they're talking about corporate lobbyists, right? Who are on the payroll of industries or of large corporations to make sure that the legislature, whether it's national or whether it's state legislature, is not passing increased regulations or things that would impact their costs or their productivity. The reality of lobbying, however, is that in addition to corporate lobbyists and special interest lobbyists, there are also a lot of nonprofit lobbyists and social issue lobbyists at both the state and the national level, and I'm one of those. So what I don't have that some of the corporate lobbyists have is, for example, a huge budget to take legislators out to dinner with, or to do things like that. When a nonprofit lobbyist or social issue lobbyist is talking about lobbying, all we're really talking about is educating our legislators. And I'll be honest, our legislators don't always agree with me, but they're incredibly respectful of the fact that a fundamental tenet of being a good lobbyist is going in with information and with data and with facts. Our legislators want to hear from their constituents and they want to hear their stories, but they also want to know the realities of the things that we talk to them about. So for me as a lobbyist and as an advocate professionally, it means kind of being an issue expert on an array of things so that I can then step in and educate our legislators about them so that they'll have an informed perspective when laws cross their desks. So that they can decide, okay, I'm going to support this bill, I'm not going to support this bill, not just based on maybe what their party line is, whether, there's a specific Democratic caucus line or Republican caucus line, but also because they have some enhanced understanding of the issues. And sometimes they don't really even understand the bill crossing their desks, not because they aren't capable of it, but because a single legislator has to review between 1,000 and 1,500 bills in a full session. They don't have the opportunity to be an issue expert on all of those bills. So it's my job to make sure they're aware of and understand the bills that are priorities for the Women's Fund and for our partners. And so lobbying is just a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, a lot of research, and a lot of conversations. And a lot of hearing no, with some hearing yes, but overwhelmingly respectful conversations that share a lot of information.
I just want to say that I think the work that you do is so cool, because I actually do like youth in government, and so they have like the little lobbyists, they have the little lawyers, they have the legislatures and stuff. So to see someone actually doing the work that like I see on a smaller scale in real life is just very cool for me. I just want to say thank you for just your knowledge and your tips and your time. Is there anything, any last notes, anything that you absolutely need to say? Any last comments?
Yes. And the one thing I want to say, particularly because I'm talking with you, and Sophie, you're a student and you're here because you're a passionate student, is I really mean it when I say there are no voices more important than student voices as we are seeking to create our new normal. I hope that things don't go back to the way they were before everything that's happening now, because I believe that we can be a better country. And I believe that in order for that to happen, we need you all. We need the youth, we need students, we need your voices. We need you promoting the equity and the fairness and the justice that we all know we need in our schools, in our homes, and in our society. And your voices may not be as experienced as mine at doing this, but I'm certain they're more powerful and more impactful because everyone cares about the future. And that's what you all are.
Thank you so much, Miss Jeannine. It's been a wonderful time getting to pick your brain. Thank you so much for your time. I believe that is it for my questions, so I will not keep you any longer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please be in touch if there's ever anything I can do for you or the Women's Fund.
Of course. Thank you.